Broadcasting from the campus of Salisbury University, this is WSDL Ocean City, NPR News Talk 90.7, putting Delmarva first. It's time for Delmarva Today with your host, Don Rush.
It's called Georgetown, but it's a Georgetown that no longer exists, where it was an African-American community that sat in the heart of Salisbury. Welcome to Delmarva Today. This is Don Rush. If one looks down from the Chipman Cultural Center off Route 13, in 1900 the scene would have looked dramatically different, including a lake that filled part of the downtown area. This was Georgetown, and this was a thriving African-American community with homes and businesses. But his disappearance began in earnest with Route 13 cutting down through Salisbury, beginning in the late 1930s, and then later Route 50 after that. In the second program on this community, we wanted to talk to some folks who live there and remember it. We have Audrey Jackson Matthews, as well as Vance Elbert and Gus White, and, of course, Councilmember Shani Shields. Welcome to you all to the program.
Thank you.
Well, Shani, I want to start with you since you're the elected official here. So what do you remember of Georgetown, and what did people tell you about Georgetown?
First of all, I didn't live in Georgetown.
Okay.
My great grandfather did, Charlie Pinkett, and also cousin Catherine Brown Leonard, whose son was a Tuskegee Airman who was born in on Broad Street in that area. And I think originally cousin Catherine and cousin Howard lived on Bowling Lane. There were 4 lanes in Georgetown. Happy Lane, Bowling Lane, Pilot Lane, and I forgot the other lane. It was another lane.
Mm-hmm.
According to my cousin Catherine's grandson, Wilmore Davis. But I attending, which is now Chipman Center, John Wesley Methodist Church. After Sunday school, I would go down to my great grandfather's house, which was on Happy Lane, and also doing some meetings with the Dawsons at Poplar Hill Mansion. I found that one of the 11 Houston slaves, and I think his slave took his name, married a relative, Leah Pinkett. At that time, the land where now the Jeanette P. Chipman Boundary Playground is, that land was owned by John Pinkett. In 1926, Howard Leonard was the first homeowner. He actually built a brand new home on Broad Street in 1926. And from my Wilmore Davis's recollection, they didn't have, he could remember people with pumps and outdoor toilets. And one of the landlords at the time was Chandler. Mr. Chandler owned property there. And they had my Aunt Gladys's sister married Dr. White, who was a black dentist who lived on Poplar Hill. And I think Audrey can tell you more about Dr. White because she lived in the neighborhood. But it was, to me, I remember it as almost an integrated neighborhood also. I think back North Division Street, which is a little past Georgetown, was Mr. Jack Burkett lived right on North Division Street across from the graveyard. Correct me when I get lost. And he lived amongst the white community, and I don't think he had crosses burned on his yard or anything. It seemed like the people were getting along in that neighborhood. The acceptance was there. They really were neighbors, you know. And I used to think the big houses coming down Isabel Street were castles. A little girl, that's what they remind me of castles on my way to church. I just loved the architecture there, but also I loved the neighborhood was just a neighborhood, you know. The people got along just like any other black community. And I remember my Uncle Walt Parsons worked for Jimmy Stewart, which was the funeral home. Am I correct? I remember that. And then Mr. Thornton Jolly used to work for Jimmy Stewart, and then he branched out on his own, and now they have Jolly Memorial Chapel, which is on Lake Street. And so many of the African American churches, when that Route 50 came, prior to that, they moved elsewhere, like First Baptist Church, and I think St. James was there too. St. Paul's, yeah. So there was a lot of our good history had disappeared, and I'm so glad that other church is still standing there as a replica of what churches were there. Because on that other side by Baptist Street, I hope nothing ever happens to that, because it'd be a shame if it did.
So your memory of it is, I mean, so there was a certain integration in the sense of when people came from different communities, that there was a certain amount of civility, I guess, for lack of a better word. That there was. I mean, did kids play together, black and white, or was that separated?
Well, see, I didn't. I was more of a visitor because I didn't live there. Yeah, I didn't live there per se, but we played. Naturally, I played with my relatives there.
Right.
But I'm assuming because Audrey could talk about that.
Across the street from us, it was a family, and the little boy was named Johnny. And he would come over. He stayed with his grandparents, and he would come over constantly, especially after school was out, and we would all play together, and he would eat with us, stay and have dinner and everything with us.
And you know, Don, that was the peculiarity of that particular neighborhood and of that particular era, because that was the era during segregation.
That's right.
And on Poplar Hill Avenue, where I lived at, the blacks lived on one side of the street, and the whites lived on the other side. But when we would play softball and play games in the street, we would all play with each other. And when school would start, those kids would go to Y Junior High and Y Senior High. And during my era, we would go to Salisbury High, which was all the way across town on the west side of Salisbury. But it was very peculiar on that, because you had a mixture of white citizens and black citizens, and we could practically go anywhere that we wanted to go without having any particular kind of problem in that particular neighborhood.
Yes.
That's true.
And that was a neighborhood that was close to downtown Salisbury before the Route 50 bypass came in.
And that's
So
true.
it was peculiar to that point.
It was.
So, well, let me turn to you, Audrey. So you were born there.
Yes.
So what was it like growing up? I mean, when was this time period? When were you like in your teens? When was that?
Oh my! I'm 86 years
Oh.
old.
All right. So now we got an idea.
Oh, yeah.
So with the 1920s, 30s, I guess.
Well, we went to Salisbury Color High School, and we used to enjoy. We had to walk, no bus. Didn't care, rain, snow, whatever. We'd have to get out, and we'd have to walk from Poplar Hill Avenue. We'd go from Poplar Hill Avenue through William Street, from William Street over to Park Avenue, from Park Avenue over to Isabel Street, on up to Lake Street to the school. And we would enjoy it. And in the spring, on Poplar Hill Avenue, between, off of North Division Street, you know where William Street is? Well, it's a little alley behind those houses. And, when the fruits and stuff come on the tree, we would, coming from school or even going, we would go down through there. And those white people were very nice to us, because they let us have a good time in their backyard with their pears or apples or whatever. So it was a lot of fun. It was nice. I loved up there.
I can remember a couple families in particular during my era, which was in the early 60s, the late 50s, early 60s. There were a couple of families on Poplar Hill Avenue where a lot of kids were present, and we were able to play ball and games and things with them. There was the Niblett family, Mr. Rudy Niblett's family, and there was also the Mitchell family. Used to play with kids such as Johnny Mitchell and Eddie Mitchell, and Johnny wound up being a pastor and a district superintendent in the Peninsula Methodist Conference, and he passed away a few months ago. So it was very unusual and peculiar neighborhood.
Yes, it was.
And there used to be a store on the corner that we would all
Cantwell
Cantwell
get sodas and things from. It was called Cantwell's Market. And on the radio at that time in 59 and 1960, they had a little jingle, Cantwell's Market, can't be beat, Poplar Hill Avenue and Broad Street. So I always remember that little jingle back in the day.
And crossed from the Baptist church on that corner. Remember Mr. Wiggins' store? The service station. Yeah. Across the street, the white man had a service station over there, and it was nice. He was nice. And Mr. Langston's store, remember Mr. Langston's store? Oh, he had all kinds of penny candy in there for us.
So you used to go in there and buy some of that? Yeah?
Yes. And it was a restaurant. I can't remember. Oh, was it Johnson? It was a restaurant. Did you remember that little restaurant?
No, I'm checking no.
Well, it was a little restaurant right next to Mr. Langston's store. You remember that, Gus? Or it was later?
Not quite. I remember Langston.
Well, it was Mr. Langston's store on the corner, and the next little, on the corner of the alley, and the next place was this restaurant. Maybe to come to me after a while. And next to that was Mr. Joe Cornish's.
Mr. Joe Cornish. Bicycle shop.
Yeah, bicycle shop. And then on the other side of the other alley was the funeral home.
Yeah,
Mr. Jimmy
Stewart.
Stewart. Oh, my. And the Flatiron building. Remember the Flatiron building in the middle?
Yeah.
And that was a hairdresser because Miss Gussie used it for a hairdresser parlor and for different things. And we had that street going in between Broad Street and Church.
That's right.
And when they put 50 through, they took all of that out because Benedict's Floors was in there, remember?
Yes.
The professional building was in there.
And Poplar Hill Avenue used to run straight on across.
Yes,
And
straight
down
across.
at the bottom of the hill was an Acme Market.
Yeah,
and
Acme Market. I remember that.
some other
And
buildings
shoe
such as
shop
Shore Distributors. Yeah.
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 A&P somewhere down there.
Acme.
Acme.
Yeah,
That was the
Acme was
Acme.
down there.
Now, there used to be, I was talking to Audrey here, there used to be a lake at one point. I guess it was Humphrey's
it
Lake,
was,
yeah.
It was down in the, where this, they had a dance hall up on the hill part, behind where the church was, but it was down more like where Shore Distributor, down in there. Somewhere in that area.
So what was it like having a big pond like that? I mean, did
Well, we didn't go down there too much, no more than go to the store, the Acme store or something. That was more like in round the pond area.
Yeah, I've heard of that.
Yeah. Yes. All that, they covered it, cleared that out.
So
Boy,
right. So there's
strange.
this
It
entire
was.
area, right? Because
Yes.
what we think of as downtown and to Market Street, that sort of thing, that was all like underwater, I take it. And then they opened it up. Of course, by the time you were growing up, they opened it up because I think the dam burst in 1909, and they just never rebuilt it, so that they have this sort of big sort of bowl kind of thing that you've got.
It was a big difference
Gus,
down there.
what do you remember?
Okay, well, I came to Salisbury in 1946, around that time. And actually, Route 13 was just coming through. My mother took myself and my brothers to Poplar Hill Avenue. And that's where we grew up with our actually cousins. We grew up like brothers and sisters. So Route 13 was just coming through, and all the turmoil. And actually, I guess around that time, I used to wonder why I went to Philly and New York. So because I didn't realize it, but what happened when the Route 13 started coming through, it demolished all the houses that my folks live in, and our family members who could not find housing in old Georgetown went to Philly and New York places, and that's where they grew up. So I used to go up there all the time. But I learned later on that they had to leave because of the houses being demolished. So I came to Salisbury just as the Route 13 was coming through. And there were, I guess, plans to bring Route 50 through. at that time, but I didn't know it. So all of my elementary school years and even high school years were in Salisbury. So I guess growing up in Georgetown, I guess one thing I learned about that life, because it was like during the agriculture era, and I learned, well, look, I used to go pick pick watermelons, string beans, cantaloupes, all kinds of vegetables, you know. One thing I learned quickly, look, I don't want to do this type of work all the rest of my life. So as I got through elementary school, and that was about around 47. And I was at the Chipman Elementary School on Lake Street. And then I used to look at the teachers and talk to the teachers, you know. And I said, boy, it's a different lifestyle for the teachers, you know. I said, look, I guess what I want to do is become a mathematician. Maybe I'll go to college and come back here and teach math. So my focus was on teaching math. Most of the people that I used to go to work for, they were educators, or they believed in education. So what they used to do, they used to encourage me to go to school and become a teacher, a math teacher. So I said, okay, I'll go to school and come back and become a math teacher. But when I got to high school, I guess it was Mr. Chipman, Charles H. Chipman, and like the math professors, people like William Hall, my teachers, you know, I said, boy, that's interesting work that lifestyle. And I like all technical stuff. And so they encouraged me to go on to college. And also, that's what I did. I said, well, look, I'll go to college and maybe major in engineering or mathematics. So I said, well, where I want to go to college. I used to, I was familiar with SU as a child because I used to come out to SU, and that was when it was farmland. And I used to go down there and pick strawberries on the SU property. And of course, Allen Farm was across the street, you know, and they sold vegetables and stuff, and strawberries and things like that. So somewhere when I was near graduation, I said, well, where do I want to go to college? I started looking at schools. Now, that was during the era of segregation now. So SU wasn't an option. So I began to look across the Chesapeake Bay Bridge. So I know one of my teachers graduated from Morgan State University and some others, you know. So I said, well, maybe I'll go to Morgan State University, even though that was across the bridge and outside of Baltimore. So anyway, that's what I ended up leaving Salisbury in Georgetown and going to Morgan State University.
Audrey, what was it like going to school here?
Oh, it was fun. We had a lot of fun, had good teachers and everything. But the walking in the wintertime was not fun, and rainy days was no fun for us.
It was not.
But we had to go, so it was life.
And what was the school like itself? What
School was fine. My godmother was my first grade teacher.
Who was your first grade?
And when from year to year, when my last graduating year, I was in academic. They moved me from general to academic, and Mrs. Chipman and Mr. Chipman, so they kept me under their wing. So when I finished, graduated from high school, I was sick, and after I got over that sick spell, then I decided I was going to go to New York, and I went to New York, and through Mrs. Chipman and Mr. Chipman, I got myself a job at Saks Fifth Avenue. And I worked there for a while until, you know how they layoff time come and the newer ones, younger ones, they were the first ones to go. So I wind up then going down to down on Broadway, working at a where they make passports and filing books, the envelopes and everything. And I enjoyed that until I just made up my mind I would come back home.
You come back here.
Yes.
So what were the Chipmans like?
Oh, they were wonderful people. Wonderful. They helped you. I mean, if they saw where you were having a problem or running into some kind, they were right there to help you.
They say that a lot of kids who went to college, that they were sent by the Chipmans and probably did not know it, because they had no children of their own. They raised Miss Chipman's
Nephew,
niece, and I didn't realize that she was a relative of mine because she was a Pinkett, like I'm a Pinkett, until we start going to the family reunions, because she always said Jeanette P. Chipman, and the P is Pinkett. So I found out later on when we started having family reunions that she was a Pinkett. I was shocked, because I always looked at her as my teacher, and the teachers. I was fortunate to go to Salisbury High until the full integration in '66, and most of the teachers that we had at Salisbury High lived. Professor Chipman provided lodging for them, and back in years ago, teachers could not marry. The women could not marry. They were mostly single women. And that was both, I think, in the black and white community, because the women would have babies. But I think they changed that ruling. And the place that he had for the teachers, he purchased it. It was called a Parsons Rest Home on West Main Street here in Salisbury, which was California's section of Salisbury. And where J.B. Parsons' home now is up on Lemon Hill. He purchased that for the residents, for the teachers. And I thought that was kind. And he also taught them how to invest their money. My cousin Elaine Brown told me that it was $1.75 a week, where he taught them about investing their money. And that's wherein I think he was genuinely concerned about all the children that they taught in the school, not just the upper crust, all the children in the school. And I think the teachers also did the same thing, because again, my cousin Elaine said the boys that were in the industrial in general, she had them to write a journal, keep a journal in her English class to teach them how to write, So I think a lot, and even Sunday school teachers, when we were growing up in John Wesley, they taught you manners. You didn't do certain things in church, because one lady, I was scared deaf of her, Miss Webb, I never forget her. You couldn't do anything because she'd come in and tap your hand. Miss Armando Francis' mom.
Yeah, I know.
And I was scared deaf of her. You did not do anything wrong in church. That's when she saw you mostly times in church. And
Miss Annie P. Webb.
Miss Annie P. Webb. She correct you. You did not do anything. Then she tell your mom what she did.
All right.
And then I remember after Sunday school, especially when I got a little older, I'd go to the drugstore down on Church Street.
On the corner.
On the corner,
track.
and he sold
the best
ice cream floats and stuff.
That was Kelly's drugstore. It was right next to the Holloway Funeral Home.
That's right. That's where it
Holloway
was.
Funeral Home was on Church Street before it moved out to Snow Hill Road. And we would go there after church. Kelly's Pharmacy.
And we weren't turned away or anything.
No,
we were treated. We were always treated with respect when you went to those establishments there. And it was Cantwell Market and the drugstore that I was familiar with in my time frame.
And Joe,
These were owned by white people or black people?
Yes,
white people, yeah.
And back where, I don't know if that's part of Georgetown, but back where the CMP, the government building now, the telephone company, that's what the Allman Theater family lived. And I think they were the first Jewish family to move to Salisbury. because my cousin Catherine Brown's grandmother worked for them. And then Tony Sarbanes and them, my mother used to play with Tony Sarbanes because my grandparents worked at the hotel. So down in that area, the whites and blacks got along, and when there were children playing, like Audrey was saying, they would play with the kids and everything. You didn't have that racial tension at that time. And my great-grandfather, Charlie Pinkett, was into politics. In the sense, I think he got people to vote for Mr. Robert Cannon. And that's how I grew to respect Mr. Cannon, because of the closeness he had with my great grandfather. He was very nice to me and my family, and but Charlie Pinkett was the one that was getting people to vote. I don't know what he did. I don't know what back in the day. I don't know if they gave a pint of whiskey or what, but he got the people to vote. And when I moved back home, Mr. Robert Cannon said, "You're Charlie Pinkett's grand?" I said, "Yep." Pepper Charlie said, "Oh," he said, he was a good man. And just the idea of how he felt about my grandfather meant a lot to me.
Now, I noticed, by the way, there were a number of people who were like waiters. I guess Solomon Houston, even Ulysses Langston, and then but they wound up owning hotels and property. I mean, how was it that you had these sort of, obviously there were low-paying jobs as waiters and so on, but they were able to accumulate and put their money together in such a way as to own property and become more than just simply the small jobs that they had?
Well, I think sacrifice. From what I was told, the house that my cousin Harvard Leonard built was $3,000, and that's a lot of money. I know my mother that raised me, she actually was my cousin. Her father had a hotel and restaurant down near Brew River. But what they did, he was a barber also. What he did, people who coming down the road would bring him dressed chickens, and a lot of times you didn't get really paid with money. So they learned that sacrifice. To me, the people in the three generations behind me, they had more than we have now, because we had our own things. For one thing, we had our own things, and they bartered or they just helped one another. It's a difference now. Sometimes now in the black and white community, you don't even know your neighbor. You don't know your neighbor. You don't visit. You don't conversate. You don't have. I can remember when after church, you had dinners at your home. Your pastors came to the house and sit and had dinner with you like a family. They don't do that anymore.
No, they don't.
And that's what's missing in a community. I hate to touch base, but you know me, Don. I got to go right there in left field. But integration, to me, hindered some of the closeness in the black community. I think we had our own restaurants. We had the Postal Card that had a nice place for social gatherings. You had the funeral homes. You had the bicycle shops. You had more black businesses then than you do now. And I mean sustaining business that don't just be here 2 years and gone. You had businesses that were here for years and was an example for the young black person coming up. And now the younger generation don't see that as much anymore.
You know, the other part, this goes back to the culture and the sacrifice of the African American community, Don, because when you look back at the center of the African American community, it was always the church. And the John Wesley Church, which today is the Chipman Cultural Center, was the center of that particular community. And when you look at the history of that particular building, when that building was purchased in 1838 by 5 freed slaves, and some of them were a part of the Poplar Hill Mansion, they were able to, with the assistance of some of the white community, to purchase that property and build the first structure for a church in this particular area. And if you remember, in 1838, that was during the era of slavery. And at that particular time, slaves could not own property. And they definitely could not vote. And at that particular time, when that building was first built, the area where the Chipman Center is right now was a part of Worcester County, because Worcester County came up to North Division Street, and on the other side of North Division Street was Somerset County. Now, after the Civil War in 1867, that became a part of Wicomico County, and the building that we refer to right now as the Chipman Cultural Center, it happens to be the oldest used wooden church structure on the Delmarva Peninsula and possibly in the state of Maryland, because that building is in use today and it was in use in 1838. And its uniqueness is that it's an all wooden structure, which means there's always maintenance to the building, but it is significant because it represents what that African American community was all about, going all the way back when it was then Worcester County.
There's the school also.
It was the first school for African American children after the Civil War, because prior to the Emancipation Proclamation, it was against the law to teach a slave to read or write. And so all of that we have come to today, we have built on the shoulders of those who have come before us. The uniqueness of Professor Chipman in purchasing the building was that even though he was an educator, his entire era of being a principal, which was 46 years from 1915 to 1961, he was a principal during the era of racial segregation. And that was a practice that came about after the Civil War, and it was also prevalent in this area till the civil rights laws and what have you were passed. We were a community that lived in the era of racial segregation here in this community, but we managed to get along. And race is a very important legacy in America. It's very few things you can discuss in American history, past, present, or future, that does not relate to race.
Now, let me ask you this: how do you assess the impact of Jim Crow on this community? In one sense, and Shani was talking a bit about how, in one sense, this community was, because it was focused on just a particular area, everybody was sort of together. That there was much more integration in the sense of people who had businesses and people who were poor and people who were wealthy, that sort of thing, because they couldn't really move out, right? It's a segregated period. So that, and I've heard this, and I've heard that by the way before in other contexts. What was this downside? I mean, but there certainly was this downside. What was the full impact? I mean,
the era of Jim Crow was the same as it was in this community as it was in almost any other community, even across the nation. And let me just say this: it was just a spirit of trying to get along to the best that we could. We had racially separate schools. When we attended the movie theater, the African Americans had to sit in the balcony. We could not sit in restaurants and eat. For example, some of the young guys that I grew up with in the Georgetown community, we remember going down to the Salvation Army to try and register to play football when we were in the 7th grade over there, and we were turned away because they didn't allow colored children to play. And we have played softball and baseball with some of the white kids in our neighborhood, and then when we got finished, we go to a restaurant, want to get a Coke or whatever, and they would say to us, those 5, we can give them a Coca-Cola, but the other ones, they have to take it out. So when it comes to the impact of Jim Crow, we experienced that also.
What did your white colleagues or the kids who were white who you played with, what did they say? I mean, did they go in? What was that relationship?
Believe
like?
it or not, in a spirit of trying to get along, when they would say that to us, then the white kids would say, "Well, we'll take ours also." They never stayed. They never stayed. So we've had that experience in the Georgetown community.
Tell me that, by the way, we've mentioned a bit of this, but there was a slew of businesses, black-owned businesses in this area, which Shani now indicates obviously has now disappeared. Indeed, with the entire community has disappeared. What were those businesses like, and what happened? Was it just simply that they bulldozed everything out because obviously they did with Route 13 and 50. I mean, what do you think, Audrey?
They did. Mr. License Store was in the area.
That they bulldozed.
Yeah, and after the restaurant was Miss Phoebe. Do you remember a lady they called Miss Phoebe?
Mm-mm.
Well, that was the restaurant next to
Miss Langston's store. Miss Phoebe's store.
And Mr. Joe Cornish's, all that. They took it out. And they started bringing 13 and 50 and cleared all that out. And Mr. Bob Toaston, remember, he had a pressing and cleaning shop at the corner of Ellen Street.
Well, I think that it shows that any time there's a highway to come through,
Yes.
any highway, it comes through our community. The last bypass was out on Jersey Road, that area. That's the last one we were doing the bypass. They came right through neighborhoods and moved. Some people had to move out. Nail Mill Road, when they expanded Nail Mill Road where Westwood is and all that, they took some houses. I know a black couple's house, Sammy Cornish's house, went.
Yes.
But it was moved across the street now. Someone purchased it. But I'm just saying, it seems like everything that we did to give pride to us, it did just bulldozed it down, and what saved Chipman, John Wesley Church, was it was on the other side. That's reality, because you had Wycomico Presbyterian, you had all them other churches, Trinity, all that. They weren't gonna come across there. I think that's the only reason why. And the other church was a white church down the corner that I was talking on the Baptist Street.
Yeah, that
was the church. And if you look at the graveyard, I have to bring that up. The Houston Cemetery. The Houston Cemetery. Some of my relatives and probably your relatives are buried out there.
All of the Lawses are buried in
The
Houston.
Lawses are buried in you?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I went out there the other day, and I looked on the website.
I stopped going.
I went out there just to look at some history, because I know some of my family was buried there. And right at the street almost, there's a big tombstone. I knew he had money. It's taller than that, where that camera is. Howard Pinkett. So I called my uncle in Georgia, and I said, "Do you know a Howard Pinkett?" Because I never heard of him. And he said that was my grandfather's brother. And he has a marble tombstone with it, and you still visibly see it. But there's a whole list of people when you go online. I think through the NAB Center, but doing the Houston Cemetery's history, that the names are there. And Murray Brown, my Aunt Georgia Brown's mother's buried there.
So this was a black cemetery.
It was basically what they really called a pauper. They said it was a pauper cemetery, but I don't believe it, because the people had tombstones on there.
And when the highway came through, a lot of those graves had to be moved, but also
Pottersville.
But also where I graduated from Salisbury High School, I think that was the third high school for the African American community, because I remember Mr. Bob Hudson used to say that he graduated from the Salisbury Colored Industrial School, and that was over there in the Georgetown era.
Yeah, on the warehouse.
In the warehouse. It was what Feldman's Warehouse.
Yes.
Is where the school was, and then the modern school, the Salisbury Colored High School,
was on Lake Street.
Was built on Lake Street across from the playground, and then Professor Chipman and the PTA, from what I understand and saw records on, raised money to help the Board of Education purchase the land that's on Morris Street, and there the Salisbury High was built, and that's the school that I graduated from. Miss Archer graduated from the Salisbury High, from the Salisbury Colored High that was on Lake Street, which is now elementary school, and we know of persons in our families and what have you, and friends that graduated from the Salisbury Industrial Colored High School, which was over in Georgetown. So we had 3 high schools before we basically got to a real nice modern school.
Yeah, Randolph Brooks graduated in 1927 from Salisbury Industrial School. My mom, Esther, graduated in 1927, Cousin Winfred graduated in 1927. Miss Leslie Cross graduated, my first grade teacher.
And Professor Chipman was principal of those schools
Yes, he was.
from 1915 to 1961. They were very good friends of my family because my family came into the era around 1939, but my father was pastor to the church then that was called John Wesley. And once he got churches up the road and came back in the Delaware Conference as a district superintendent, that's when I came back. But Professor Chipman did a great thing when he purchased that building for posterity when the Delaware and the Peninsula Conferences merged, and that congregation built a church which is now down on West Road called Wesley Temple, and he was able to save that building, which is a historic building, and it is the remaining replica of what that thriving black community was here in Salisbury before Route 50 came through and moved all of that out of there.
Now, as I understand it, there was this. It looks as if there was this effort to move the African American community out of Georgetown to the west side. I think it was Sunset Heights. I think it was the. Do you get a sense that that's what happened? That part of that was not just simply the roads and stuff, but that there was.
I would say during that era, when those decisions were made, Don, that was during the era of racial segregation. So it'd only be practical to say that during that particular time, that thought probably trended itself. And as in any city or community that's building, there are strategic and comprehensive planning that takes place. It's not something that you dream up overnight. Let's put a highway through here. So you would have to say that because of that era, that definitely was a factor. I don't think anybody could dispute that. That was definitely a factor. And then that gave birth to the West Side, and that's where the majority of the African American community resided in this area, was on the West Side once that highway came through, once Route 50 came through there. So,
Audrey, did you get that sense? Did you get a sense that your community was slipping away?
Yes. Because when they started tearing out the houses, for the highway, yes, yes, I did. Yeah, it hurt.
See, we even had some churches in that area. Yeah. We had St. Paul Church, First Baptist Church, and First Baptist today is located on the corner of Delaware Avenue and Booth Street. But originally, First Baptist was right over there in the Georgetown area.
That's right.
On the corner of Poplar Hill Avenue.
So, Audrey, you said it hurt. What do you mean?
Well, maybe it was because, I was born up there and raised up there. But it was just, and, we had the home place. My great uncle had bought this house where I was born, had bought this house for his mother, which was my great-great-grandmother. And, we were in it, all these years. And then when they started, buying us from the corner, buying people and everything, and I did everything I could, to try to save the home place. But from from uptown, they told me we didn't have enough footage. I wanted to, after he condemned the home place, I wanted to try to build something else, another place there. And he told me that we didn't have enough footage, front nor back. So they demolished it, and we had, naturally pay for the keep it, in the family. So that's why I say it hurt. It really hurt.
So did your house then? They just demolished it.
Yes.
And took it for the highway. Yeah,
for the they paid us and everything.
Right.
But they took it for the playground. For their playground, and that's why the playground began right at the
playground. Rama's Nest. It was called Rama's Nest first.
Well, anyway, they took it, the land starting from where the district superintendent's house was now. It's still standing. But see, our house was next to that. Right. So they cleared out all of that, clean to the corner.
Didn't Miss Hutt live there? Didn't the Hutts live somewhere?
She lived up middle way. You know where Walnut Street is? She lived in that house facing Walnut Street.
Miss Ella Hutt.
Yeah.
Miss Ella. And the thing is sad that now if you have a house, as long as the house is standing, you got a foundation, you can rehab it. They told you that.
They told me that I could not.
But see, if the house was still standing, that's another story. But anyway, it's a way to get your property.
Yeah, it just disappeared. Yeah.
That's the way they got your property. But I think it's sad when they do that.
Yeah.
And see what happened when 50 came through in 56. We moved. We moved on Jersey Road, not Sunset. And in the California section, they did the same thing. Came right through 50. Came right through the black community again, and took several houses. And we they didn't take our house, but my father felt it was too close to the highway for me, in the noise, I guess, because we lived across the street from the incinerator. Because the incinerator was right in the smack dab in the black community, where they burned trash and stuff. So we moved out on Jersey Road. Miss Jolly went first, the Jolly family. Then we came second, and I think churches, Irvin Church, them lived on Catherine Street. But they moved. They just come right through came straight down, and just took out.
There's no question, Don, that the highway coming through displaced a major African American community.
That's right.
And that's a fact.
Both two communities.
It did displace it.
Let me just raise one other issue. In 1931, there was a lynching of an African American. What kind of impact do you think that had on the community? I mean, well, let me start with Audrey, because I mean she lived in the area.
I was born in 1928.
So because some people have suggested, there's a suggestion that the observation that here's this horrific event that occurs. Certainly, I mean, African Americans when they started the lynching of this particular individual, everybody, if you were African American, you left the area. But then, come like Monday morning or whenever it is, you got to go back into those white houses, some of whom then somebody may have participated in or watched it or been sympathetic. Or what sense do you get about the impact of that event?
They didn't leave the area. They didn't leave the area the day of the lynching. Some blacks were not allowed to leave. My grandfather, Stanley Pinkett, and Mr. Howard Purnell were. My grandfather was a bell captain at the Wycomico Hotel. They made them go on the roof of the hotel and watch it. Ooh. And my grandfather got word, I don't know if they had telephones back then, I doubt it, but he got word in the California community, because that was closer, for everybody to stay in the house.
That's what we were told.
That's what you were told?
Yes, Mom.
Said stay in the house. Dr. Brown, who could pass for white, he was down there watching it, scared to death. And I wasn't born, but look, I wasn't born, but my mom Esther and some relatives were telling, and he came back because he was scared that they would lynch him. He was black, and that's what he gets for. And he had a cap on his head. I can describe him. He had a hat on his head. I see him now. He had straight hair and had a cap on his head, and watching them do this to this man. But he and it's part of our history. It's a bad history.
Yeah.
I know there's rumors of tear the courthouse down, the trees cut down. It's part of history. There's good and bad history, and you have to live with good and bad history. You can't run away from it. They got a thing now, but the Confederate stone in the Levin Winder. Well, I have a feeling that Levin Winder is related to my mom Esther, because her father was named Arthur Winder. So I don't know if he's a relative. I'm just curious to see if he is. But the Confederacy was part of history. You can't wipe it out. People had beliefs of that time. I didn't support that, but that's part of history, and we can't run away from it. And I'm a history lover, so there's good history, bad history, and I look at what they did to the Native Americans, and you can't just wipe out history. Period. You have to, and I think that the Confederate stone should stay there. I think the courthouse should stay there because the architecture is nice, beautiful.
But we also have pictures of when that lynching took place of Governor Ritchie, who was then the governor of Maryland, and I guess that's where Ritchie Highway was named after, where he sent federal troops to Salisbury, and we can see the pictures of the troops all along North Division Street, where the old fire station is, and you kind of look towards up North Division Street, and you can see all a maze of troops right here in Salisbury in 1931, because they feared that there was going to be a race riot, and so he sent the troops in here to quell the disturbance, and that's part of the history.
Do you think it had a lingering impact? Do you think it changed the relationship at all between?
It may have had a lingering effect to a point where it is considered a tactic of intimidation, but law and order must prevail. I mean, law and order has to apply to everyone. But I'm sure not being there or even being born at that time, I'm sure it had a intimidating effect on the community, because when we talk about Jim Crow, when we talk about racial segregation, a lot of us that have experience in Salisbury, we remember. In fact, I remember a group of us, again, talking about Salvation Army. I remember a group of us, George Stevens and Do Baby and Billy Reed and that group. I remember us going down to City Park and playing in City Park, and then the cop cars would roll up and say, "Out of there, you're not allowed in this park." And those are things that so many people take for granted to this day. But a lot of us came up during the era of racial segregation, during the civil rights era, to a point where we've transitioned into the community that we are today. And I will have to say there is a very strong effort from both sides that the communities peacefully coexist, even though we have our questions and concerns. But race is it's a very, very big factor in American history, and even in our local community history.
And it's still there.
Very big factor.
It's still there. I know Miss Lucretia in Somerset County, the lynching they had there. I tried to get her to talk about it, and by me working for the newspaper, they wanted me to talk to Miss Lucretia. She wouldn't talk about it. Some things people put in the back, subconscious, the bad things, and they don't want to talk about it. And that's probably what we're taught now. What Vance was just saying about his experiences that he had, I never had those experiences. I guess I was sheltered in a way that we went to everybody's business that was black owned, because my daddy came from Jamaica that raised me, and we went to black owned stuff. Melvin Samples restaurant. We dealt downtown. Tony's shoe store. I wasn't exposed to being turned away to things like my other classmates may have experienced. But it was there. I got the full blown thing when we integrated schools at Y High. Yeah. The full blown thing.
We saw it here during the Civil Rights era. For example, Old Harmon Field was right there on Carroll Street. It's where the health department is now. It's out there off of Shoemaker Drive area now. But I remember a group of us from our neighborhood where we were the first ones to go to Harmon Field and sort of integrate that particular playground. So much so that the photographers from Life magazine came down and they took some pictures of black and white kids playing together at Harmon Field, because also at that particular time during the sit-in demonstrations in the early 60s, there was a lot of racial strife, not only in Cambridge but also in Princess Anne. So Salisbury was like between both of these two towns, and so we experienced that also, because Princess Anne Academy and Maryland State College, which is now UMES, they were all a part of the African American community, educating its own in those historically black institutions, to a point where we've transitioned into today to integrated institutions of higher learning. So
let me ask you this, because when I really stumbled onto this, I was not aware that this community existed at all, except that somebody at a restaurant mentioned it to me. Why do you think that nobody seems to know about it? I mean, it seems to. I mean, I've talked to people and they said, really, there was a Georgetown. They had not heard of it. To say nothing about California, New Jersey, that sort of thing. Why do you think it's disappeared from?
Which
I mean,
didn't know about it?
Well,
Georgetown.
maybe it's the white community.
Well, they changed the name to Newtown, but it's the far.
Right.
But it was always Georgetown, and it's still Georgetown. Right. Records can show it was Georgetown. John Pinkett owned that land where the playground is. Right there where the playground is.
Yeah, and
there's a John Pinkett. I don't know who he is. Some relative of mine.
But I imagine that's where Uncle John, which is my great uncle, when he bought the home place, he probably got it through
John Pinkett. And see the thing, they want to wipe your history out, and then we allow it to happen. I can't put it all on the white community. We need to teach our children the history of our grandfathers, and we need to want to find out about the history. See, I'm the person I thirst for what my family history is, and some people don't thirst for that. They're momentary. They won't know what's happening right now.
Do you think that young African Americans know about Georgetown?
No.
Except for when they come into association with the Chipman Cultural Center. Your curiosity would tend you to say, well, why is this building here in this particular area, and there's no other African Americans visibly in this area? Why is this church there, or this church structure there? But once you start going below the surface and digging into the facts, you soon find out that there was a thriving African American community that was displaced by Route 50 highway, and was it intentional or not? It was definitely consequential because it affected the history and the culture of the African American community in that area, and by displacing it, there's neither track nor trace that it ever existed.
What do you think? What do you think is the legacy then of Georgetown? Or is it just going to, do you think, disappear? I mean, obviously we'd be able to go to the Chipman Center, but outside of the Chipman Center, do you think there's a legacy there?
The legacy probably will be that this is where it all started in this area. Poplar Hill Mansion once owned the majority of land there. And so all the streets and most of the houses that are in that era prior to the Civil War and just after the Civil War were land transfers that came from the Poplar Hill Mansion. And so it saw its beginning, and then as slavery was ended after the Civil War, and you had African Americans moving and dissipating into the community, that probably sprung up that particular community where the church was. And then over a period of time, when highway came through, neither track nor trace that it ever existed and that they ever lived there.
Let me ask you this, since you're the elected official, she sort of sighs. If I drive around the city, I don't see any recognition of it. I mean, there's a Chipman Center, but why doesn't the city celebrate this? Why doesn't it mark it? Why hasn't it? In some plaque, something to recognize that it was here.
I think that's a goal of mine. I haven't done it yet because especially I live in the California neighborhood, and the Purdue company had loaned us a little garden where I want to put it in California, name it California. I was told by a meeting that if I started naming things, it'd be like gang signs and all that stuff. But it was part of teaching the younger black community about the history and the naming of like Sunset Heights, California, Georgetown. There's something called Cuba. It used to be called
Little Cuba.
Little Cuba.
Down there where Mr. Warner Marsh and them stayed down in that area.
But see, it's also a part of a tale that is told in the fact that we're trying to preserve and hold on to the Chipman Cultural Center because it is a result. It is a reflection of that community. That community built that structure. In fact, a lot of people don't even know that in 1882, Frederick Douglass, who was the Marshal of Washington, D.C., came to Salisbury and spoke at the courthouse to raise money to add that second floor onto the Chipman Cultural Center. See, when it was first built, it was that single story, and after the Civil War, it became the first school in Wycomico County for African American children. But then Frederick Douglass came here in 1882, and he was a great statesman and abolitionist who had dinner with President Abraham Lincoln at least 8 times. So we do have a historic connection in that community dating all the way back to Frederick Douglass. But then again, that takes us right back to the race legacy in our culture because of the slavery, the abolitionists, and also the Civil War. And so that's the importance. That is one of the important reasons why we must preserve and hold on to the Chipman Cultural Center so that story can be told.
We've been speaking with Audrey Jackson Matthews, also Vance Elbert, Shani Shields, Gus White, talking about a community called Georgetown, which has disappeared, an African-American community, and maybe Shani will remind us from time to time that it was actually there. You've been listening to Delmarva Today. I'm Don Rush. Thanks for listening.
This has been Delmarva Today, a production of Delmarva Public Radio. Chris Rank produces and is our audio engineer. Don Rush is your host. For podcasts, visit our website, delmarvapublicradio.net, or subscribe to the Delmarva Today podcast in iTunes. Delmarva Today can now be seen on PAC 14. To view the schedule, visit the Daily Times or visit pac14.org.